I think we should start our breakout. Um, I'm Michele Barbato, a professor of structural engineering and structural mechanics in UC Davis, and I will be moderating this breakout on climate resilience and the UC DRN partnerships. Today we have four distinguished panelists here. Bruce Riordan from UC Berkeley, who is online, and Professor LeRoy Westerling from UC Merced, Dr. Rohini Haar from UC San Francisco, and Dr. Anna Serra-Llobet from UC Berkeley. So please, let's welcome all our panelists. I'll like to have today an actual panel, so with as much interactivity as possible. So I will give a few minutes to each of the panelists to introduce themselves, say what they work on, what type of partnership they are leading or contributing to, and then hopefully after 20-25 minutes of us talking, we can start having a more interactive action with the attendees. So let me start with Bruce Riordan from UC Berkeley. Please go ahead.
Can I share a slide on the screen?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to share a slide or two if I could. If I can't, I'll just yak. But it says I can't share. Thank you. Okay, well, good afternoon. I'm Bruce Riordan. I run the Berkeley Climate Change Network at UC Berkeley. We are a collaboration of about 300 individuals and organizations on campus and up the hill at Berkeley Lab that are working on climate. I was asked to give a quick 10-minute, so we'll say 9-minute now, a very quick overview of climate resilience work across the UC system. So hold on, here we go. The good news is, and you've been hearing this all morning and at lunch as well, there's a lot of good work going on at the UC system on all 10 campuses around climate resilience. You could say it's steadily growing. You might even be able to say it's rapidly growing. And when we talk about climate resilience work, it's all three parts of the university. It's research, it's education and teaching, and impact or service, as we call it. I put some selected examples, very selected. Don't be upset if I don't have you up here, but I picked some things to throw up on the screen just to show us kind of going from the south to the north, if you go left to right there, starting with San Diego and Riverside and Irvine, UCLA and Santa Barbara, and then moving over to the right-hand side of the screen, some examples, again, selected examples of resilience work at Merced, Santa Cruz, Berkeley, San Francisco, and Davis. It was very easy, frankly, to put this slide together. I could have done 5 or 6 of these. There's that much good work going on now on climate resilience here. Some of these things that are on the screen and ones that are not on the screen are long-time environmental institutes or centers at various campuses, and they're now focusing much more on climate, while others that you'll see on the screen are brand new or fairly new just in the last couple of years, and they are 100% most of the time focused now on climate as we go forward. Something else to observe, and you've again, I think, heard some of this morning. We're covering all the topics: wildfire, drought, sea level rise, heat. I should probably say heat 3 times. It's that important. And we're covering the impacts of those things on ecosystems, on infrastructure and on human health and all. So three themes that I could just see from looking through these in the last day as I was putting this slide together. Three themes. One, it's everybody on campus more and more. You know, this was originally, I think, a lot more on the environmental section of our campuses. It's now law schools and policy schools, it's engineering schools, it's data science, it's business, it's around startups and entrepreneurs. It's really reaching into letters and science now, here into the humanities. It's really reaching, thankfully, all parts of these various campuses, some more degree than others. At Berkeley, for instance, we have more people in our network from the Rausser College of Natural Resources than any other college, but we have really good chunks from engineering and public health and CED and some of the others. And I think the same is probably true across the system. Second theme, and you see it here on some of the slides, is justice. Fortunately, there's a tremendous amount of focus now from students and from faculty and researchers on climate justice, on environmental justice. It's not just climate change. It's not the climate change world that I started working in 20 years ago, thankfully. We are now talking climate justice every day, and we should be, and there's lots of work going on. Not only the Center for Climate Justice here, you see up at the top, headquartered at Marin, and some of the things here, like UCLA with the equitable heat strategy there. CLE at the Berkeley Law School is doing a whole piece on heat and health, looking at vulnerable communities. So fortunately, that is much more front and center now, justice. And the third is that we're really concerned here with impact, and you've heard this theme this morning. We're concerned with not just doing research or not just teaching students and engaging students, but having an impact because we have to, and focused on solutions. You know, the climate world that I came into 15 or 20 years ago was really mostly about getting out to tell people how much trouble we're in and all of that, and to chart that and to make a case for it. We still have to do that a lot, and we still need to do that in a very honest way, but we can now communicate about solutions and talk solutions and talk about impact. So wonderful work going on. Let me try one other angle here. This is a list of those who received grants from the UCOP Climate Action 100 million program that was just awarded in the last couple of months. And again, you'd see if I blew this up and you could actually read it, you would see the same themes of justice, of many different parts of campuses being involved. And really, and they ask for this a lot, impact, showing results, showing California how our great university and our CSUs and all are working together to really make a difference in the lives of Californians and across the globe. So I'd say a good straight, if we're in academia, a good straight B here so far, B plus maybe. We need to do more. We need to accelerate our work. We need to go deeper with the work. You all know how much trouble we are in, and we need to be pushing on solutions. One final thing, just an opportunity that came up yesterday that I think each campus should be looking at, and maybe already you are today. This is part of the 5th climate change assessment, which we've heard about this morning a bit. Regional synthesis reports are going to be done in 9 different regions again. We did this last time for the 4th assessment. I was part of the group that came up with the idea. There was no
Bruce, sorry, I hate this part of the job as moderator, but can you bring it to an end so that we can have time also for the other 3 panelists?
Sorry about that. 30 seconds. This is an opportunity for each campus to look at this on the web and see about being a coordinating officer. Thanks for letting me talk with you today.
Thank you, Bruce. I'll proceed with LeRoy Professor LeRoy Westerling from UC Merced.
Well, I think people have already, my life? Yeah. I think people have already gotten my opinions about things this morning and also an idea of what we're working on. I'll just say that there are a lot of downstream links to this, right? So the information that we're producing for the fifth state climate assessment is also getting folded into thinking about, for example, changes in habitat suitability for endangered species across different parts of the state. We look at impacts on public health from smoke emissions from wildfires. What does it mean for insurance markets being able to function if you could better quantify how the risks are changing for insurers and homeowners alike? So there's just a lot of applications. But again, just like Bruce was showing us here with the slide, there's too much out there, right? Even if you were to ask any leader of the UC system what its researchers are doing, they'd have a hard time telling you what it is that's actually happening across the UC system and how to coordinate and bring together complementary projects. So just having a one-stop resource where you could scrape the web of all this information and create an intelligent database that's intelligently searchable, right? To find out who's doing what, with whom, where, would be a big step forward. We always say the power of 10 for the UC system, but we don't even know what's going on in individual campuses. So we could be way more effective if we could amplify our efforts across the campuses and even within a campus to know who's doing what and make it more accessible and transparent to the outside world.
Thank you, LeRoy. So let's proceed with the Dr. Rohini Haar. Please.
Do you want me to use slides or should I just?
As you prefer. If you have slides,
That's all right.
you can use the slide.
No, that's fine. My name is Rohini Haar. I'm an emergency room doctor and in Oakland and faculty at UC Berkeley in the School of Public Health, but mostly I spend my time at the Human Rights Center at the law school at UC Berkeley. And being a doctor on every once a week and being faculty the rest of the time has been really eye-opening and given me maybe a unique lens on the work on climate work and climate catastrophes, really, on how that affects patients and health workers. So a couple years ago in 2018, we decided to do a study after some of the major fires in 2017 and 2018 on what health workers face, what are their experiences when they're dealing with fires, and what they're dealing with in the weeks, months, and even a year or two after a fire. We expected to find really what you would imagine, like, oh, we were inundated with asthma cases and it was really tough. And we saw that in these open-ended interviews. But what we really saw was that it was so much deeper, longer, and broader than that. So just to sum it up, I would say one was that most of the providers that we talked to were also victims. Health workers, social workers, social service providers, they live in the communities that they work in. And when there was fires, their communities, their homes were also burned. Second is the effects were not just on health, there were also social effects and economic effects, and they were all intertwined. One thing that I thought was really shocking was that, and most of you probably know this, but housing costs skyrocket in neighboring communities after a fire. And so folks who, their houses were fine, they weren't affected, now couldn't afford to get housing. Folks who, even if you were talking to doctors, if they had to move, then all of the people they employed, their nannies and their gardeners and all of those people were also out of jobs. And so there was these ripple effects throughout the community. And the third point that was really salient to me in that study was that we were interviewing people a year, 2, 3 years after fire. FEMA had already left by then. A lot of institutions had left, and what was left was really local organizations and local government. And they couldn't possibly fill the gaps that were left when people didn't have housing or were struggling with jobs or getting their kids back in school or all the trauma that they faced. That study really kickstarted for me and for the Human Rights Center a new program on climate justice, which we're working on now, to really think about how this affects all of California. And I think a climate justice or a health and human rights approach is really useful for a lot of our work. It centers victims. I won't call them us survivors because we truly are victims, that it's actively ongoing. And it forces an interdisciplinary work that we've all been talking about today. You have to have laws and policies in place, you have to have science behind it, and you have to have advocates, and all the way down to your local ER doctor, really on the same page. And I'll just share two of the projects that we're actively working on now. Maybe you'll have answers. One study that we're hoping to do is looking at farm workers in Sonoma County and Napa County, because when there's mandatory evacuations for fire or smoke, a lot of these farm workers are still expected to go to work. And we need our food, right? It's not unreasonable that the smoke might not be that bad. Most community members are asked to leave, but there should be protections in place when they are asked to come back. And Sonoma County actually has remarkable new legislation that we should study to see if it's going to work more statewide. Another question one of my researchers and I posed recently is there a right to cooling? On the one hand, we say always in human rights, like the most marginalized people are the ones who kind of face the worst trauma and face the worst effects. And with extreme heat, that's definitely going to be the case. But if you say you have a right to have cool environments and we're upping all the air conditioners in the state, then that's going to sort of shoot ourselves in the foot. So how do you use human rights to fix these problems, but not worsen them at the same time? I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohini. And last but not least, Anna Serra-Llobet. And I think you have a presentation here. So,
what presentation?
How to bring up the presentation?
Hi. Well, I thought I had 30 minutes and I only have 7. So the presentation I prepared is not going to be exactly what I'm going to explain. So one thing, I worked at the European Union before coming here to Berkeley. And yeah. So, and one of the things I was in charge of is to look at EU-funded research on hydrometeorological hazards and how could we make all this knowledge translated into action. So it's very interesting to see that we have the exact same challenges here. So I'm just going to explain that we started the Flood Hub a few years ago, trying to create a network of people in different UC campuses that work on flood-related issues. So what let me see here. Oh, I see. So anyway, so there are different research groups that work on, for example, the UC lab works on river restoration and sustainable dam management all around the world, in the Mekong, in many different countries. I'm not going to go through the details. Then we have the Center for Catastrophic Risk Management that deals more on residual risk and high reliability organizations. We have UC Davis that have a very interdisciplinary program in their center on not just dealing with floods, but also how we can sustainably manage water in California. And then we have UC Irvine that works on a lot of very advanced modeling and simulations and different techniques that can improve the assessment of disasters. And Amir, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes so you can explain your thing. So basically what we are trying to do here is how we can create projects that are truly interdisciplinary and that deal with the different dimensions of flood problems, which is not, and they are still very, very siloed. Amir, if you want to say a couple of things about your research center, because Amir and I met just to organize this session, and we haven't yet seen each other. Are you online? Okay. Otherwise, I'm just going to mention briefly, Amir works at the Center for Hydrometeorology and Remote Sensing at UC Irvine, and they are working on a very broad range of topics, but also compound hazards, etc. And I'm just going to say that for teaching, we also realize there is the same exact problem. We all have 1,000 million courses on disasters, flooding, but everyone extremely silent. Either how we deal with infrastructure, or social scientists, how we disaster and risk perception, or water management, etc. So we created a disaster course. That was an initiative that came from this UC-DRN. And the idea is to have a more interdisciplinary understanding, and also not only how many disasters are, what are they, and how they interact with each other, and how the students can get some tools and some ideas on how that can apply to many different aspects. And, oh, okay, so let me just finish with the courses, Amir, and I'll give you the word. So the second course we started last year as well is on flood risk management. So we work with all the people that I mentioned before. So it's not just about floods, how we map floods, which is 99% of the courses out there. But it's also how we manage floods, geomorphological aspects of floods. So floods can be good, and somebody mentioned before, we need to understand better groundwater recharge, how we protect that. So it's more interdisciplinary, and it's open, this one is also open to practitioners and graduate students. And the last course is gonna start this year. Well, they started it's between UC Davis and AHE Delft, which is under the auspices of the UNESCO. And this course it's a certificate program that tackles sustainable management of groundwater and droughts, global approaches to flood risk management and freshwater management, and sustainable ecosystems. So linking the different aspects of flooding. And let me see what else I have here. Okay, so Amir, you want to go?
Yes, thank you. You covered it all. Just very briefly, our center generates near real-time satellite data that are widely used within UC and also outside. We have lots of users from Africa, Asia, other places regularly downloading and using this. Near real-time is 40 minutes from observations. The data becomes available to the public. And also there are multiple groups working on compound and cascading hazards, interaction between different events.
Thanks, Amir. And the last, I think it's the last slide I have, is publication. So as a product of this disaster course, we also realized that the books that exist out there are also very silent. So we are trying to come out with a book that tries to tackle more the interdisciplinary nature of disasters. And I think with that, you have the presentation for the details if you want to know more about each center. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So I'll just make a couple of very brief comments, building on what was presented by our panelists. One aspect that seems to be recurring is multidisciplinarity. And particularly multidisciplinarity that pushes us as researchers to have a real impact in the world. Too many times we measure impact with numbers that now are becoming void of meaning, like number of publications and number of citations. We really want to start seeing real impact in the world, and that is what UC system, the UC system is all about. Also, in the optic of multidisciplinary interdisciplinarity, I wanted to bring attention to another initiative relatively new that I'm involved with, that is the CITRIS Climate Initiative, CITRIS standing for Center for Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society. This is a multi-campus organization that includes UC Davis, UC Berkeley, UC Merced, UC Santa Cruz, that obviously uses information technology for the benefit of society. And in this case, we are bringing together people that are working on climate on different aspects, and we are working with the Policy Lab, another branch of CITRIS, to transform the results of our research into something that can be used by policymakers and that can be explained and actualized. Another thing that was recurring is coordination. I imagine a little bit everywhere in the campuses there is this desire to coordinate the work, first of all to understand what is going on, but also to make better use of resources. We just started at UC Davis a grand challenge on climate solutions that has as goal understanding what's going on campus and having a coordination across the different research centers and institutes that are working on different aspects of climate, including assessment, mitigation, and adaptation. A third point that I don't think was made, but I think is important, is UC system and California in general are doing great in terms of work for climate, but we are not the only one working on climate. And there needs to be also better coordination of what we are doing right now with what is being done and is being done, not only in the United States, but around the world. A couple of things that to which I would like to bring attention. We talk a lot about the California climate assessment. There is also a national climate assessment. And I would like to see more involvement of researchers from the UC system in that part also, because we have a lot to offer to our partner states, but also they have a lot to offer to us. And then another activity that I'd like to see happen more often, a task force that was developed by NOAA in collaboration with the ASE, the American Society of Civil Engineers, to finally introduce the concept of climate change in our design codes. You may not be aware of, but all of the design that we are doing right now, at least for structures, are based on the last 50 years of climate information, and things are changing. So we, in 2028, for the first time, will have a chapter that will actually allow structural engineers to use prediction and projections in their design of structures. And so I'm taking already too much time. At this point, I would like to open this panel to a discussion with all of the participants, and I would like to thank all of the attendees that are here and listening to us. So at this point, I think I'll stop talking. I'd like to hear you talk with questions, comments, or any other type of information that you would like to share with us. Don't be shy. Jay down there.
I think any group of academics, multidisciplinary academics, in these kind of forums, the first thing they will say is, we need more collaboration. And that's the hardest thing to do, of course, because we're all semi-sovereign, independent states. We often need some sort of funding source or opportunity to help us collaborate, or we need to have somebody from outside of the university, ideally, from an agency, say, we would like you all to come help us with this problem. So we need some central motivation outside of ourselves. Otherwise, most university people will come to the problem and say, well, how can you help me with my research program? Not, how do we collaborate to solve this problem? So do you have any suggestions on how the UC system can collaborate with others to entice us to actually work together? Thank
you, Jay. I think LeRoy is going to take the first bite to this.
Well, I think collaboration is expensive, right? It takes time, and the more people that you're collaborating with, in a project, the less time you have to actually get new work done. So as a first step, I wasn't proposing really more collaboration so much as transparency. A one-stop database where people could go and make natural language inquiries to find out who's working on what. So if you have a community in California that's working on a climate action plan, they have a particular problem that they don't know how to address, whether it's an endangered species or a cultural resource, something like that, they'd be able to look and see, well, who's working on this? Who's done this? And not have to be specialists in it to get that question answered, and then be able to reach out and say, hey, could you help us understand this problem better? I think that basic tools like that are really going to give us a lot more bang for the buck than just saying everybody come together and work on everything together. I mean, that's just not practical. So
I think it's a great idea. We've got Zoom. You could use maybe A&R's extension system as a way of collecting that data and maintaining it, because it's nice to be able to have a database, but somebody's got to maintain it. And to me, the university extension personnel that already exist in every county of the state might be the place to maintain that database.
Well, so that's sort of the old-fashioned way to do it, right, is to get people to tell you what they're doing. But really, all the data that we need is out there and free and public. We just need to scrape it and use the right kind of software to pull it together. We had a proposal for that in the climate action funding opportunity. Actually, there's just very few of the proposals actually got funded, so that was one that did not. But it's something that would pay dividends for the state to do it.
I might actually add to your question and say I agree with you that I think external forces often force us to collaborate. So Citrus, for example, demands that you have at least 2 UC schools collaborate, which has forced me to do that, whereas it might be easier to stay at Berkeley. I have another grant that said you have to have an operational partner on a completely different issue, but you couldn't just be an academic center applying. You had to have an operational service provider as part of your grant. And then the second thing, and I don't know if Bruce is still on, but he actually manages this massive spreadsheet of all of these organizations that I found incredibly useful when I'm thinking about it. Or I think in the spring, there was a conference that he organized on extreme heat, and it got me talking to tons of people about that issue just because they had free breakfast and lunch, and we listened to some lightning talks.
When I was working at the U and we were trying to put together this data set, one of the key questions is how are we going to classify all that? Because most of the projects were touching different topics. It was not just mapping. It was not just, and I think that was one of the trickiest part, how you create a system that looks relatively simply so people can click no on the topic that they are looking for. And the second part that was really relevant to the European Union was how we translate the main outcomes of this very complex project that took so many years into very key policy action and whoever the action is intended to, like community action. And that was another very, very difficult aspect because people publish tons of reports for each project, but nobody makes the effort to synthesize it and make it really translatable to common language. So I think, that will be a big challenge.
There is Bruce that wanted to add something online.
Yeah, just what Rohini said. We have a database for the campus that has like 300 entries now, but that's a tool for us to use. What we really are trying to do is create a human network and as she said, to get people in person together on campus. That's where the relationships, I think, get built. And then we've got to figure out a better way to do that from the campus to off campus. But the same idea, create more of a human set of links, and then the database can just be something you use as a tool.
I wanted just a little comment. I was actually advocating for more collaboration. And the reason being, on one side, because collaborative projects are interesting. They are complicated, but they are interesting, and they tend to actually solve real problems that are in the field, in the community, in what we want to make better. And responding to the question, how do we do it? It's very complicated. I have a project with LeRoy, a UCOP Lab Fees project. We spent the first 6 months just trying to understand what we were talking about and developing a terminology that was common to people that are in engineering, working on fire, on structures, in medicine, in the national labs. They have a completely different, I don't know, different language, I guess. So it is difficult. But there are forces that are pushing us toward that. It's not happening because everybody wants to just work with other people. It is happening because states and federal government want real solutions, and real solutions are multidisciplinary. You cannot work on your little slice of things and try to really solve a problem. And then there is also another factor that was also presented by the panelists, incentives. I just responded to this question talking with our chancellor and provost the other day, but faculty respond very well to incentives. So incentives doesn't mean necessarily only money. There are a lot of things that can provide incentives, starting from merit promotion and tenure. If we start measuring real impact, which is already a big topic of discussion, then the incentives will create themselves and will trickle down, and I don't know if I should use that terminology. It's not many people like it, but that is a way in which everybody can get involved in doing work that is collaborative. And I'm going to stop here because I know that there was a question coming from that side.
Hi, okay. So folks have already said this in some sort of way already, so I want to acknowledge that, but I thought it's worth repeating that clearly there is a need for more collaboration. There's a need for researchers on one campus to know what others are doing, and then there's a need for us to figure this out system-wide across campuses. So those are two different but related audiences. And then there's another need to translate this work and collaborate with policymakers. That's a different type of audience, different language, different needs. And then community members. And so I think the information that community members might need or seek, especially if they're coping with disasters, is actually going to be very different from maybe what a database that we all need or seek can provide. So I just wanted to put that out there just to make sure when and if we put resources into collaborating and creating databases, we're mindful about the impact and the potential impact it can have.
Thank you. Is a question coming there? Comment? Oh.
So I don't want to lose sight what the other audience member said. So my name is Tracy Shore, and I am a part of Cooperative Extension, and I'm actually a livestock and natural resources advisor based in Butte, Plumas, and Sierra counties. So they've been in the news a lot for fire, right? And so I think tying back to that community element, there is a structure within UC, like Bruce was talking about, how do we get it to the communities that exist? And so I think, how do you tap in to this cooperative extension network? And thanks to the legislature has had an influx of funding recently to hire more community-based extension agents. And I wrote down a statement that was said earlier, and I think it resonates with what we're feeling in the community level as well of, you know, sometimes researchers come in, they swoop into communities, and they leave when the funding's gone. but there's a part of extension that is there before the fire to help them become resilient. They're there in the middle of a disaster, helping them deal with the trauma. They are, we're losing our houses. Our colleagues are losing their houses. Our friends and neighbors are losing their houses in these disasters as well. We're there to help them access funding in the end. We're conducting research. And so I think, how can we strengthen that relationship between cooperative extension, where it may not be at all the universities, but there is that local link in the community? And I think that we should leverage that, which is already there, and people that are in place to help bring these resilient communities to recover and strengthen themselves for the future.
Thank you. I see that Amir has his hand up and probably is waiting from a previous comment. So sorry, Amir.
No, that's okay. Everyone mentioned that the main driver for collaboration is external. I totally agree. And in my case, a lot of my collaborations started in conferences, in-person meetings, or bars after conferences. So that building relationship is really important. One of our DRN conversations a while back was, do we need to have UC-wide events like this one so people can meet and interact and build relationships? By the time you see a funding opportunity, it's too late to start building it. You should have your relationships already in place. So one question I think for all of us is, do we need to design strategically events like this, mainly in person, for people to get together and develop those relationships so we can properly respond to big funding opportunities?
Should we take on these before we go to the other question? Anybody wants to respond on Amir's comment? Or should we go to the next comment?
I'll just say that the funding rates for researchers applying to things like NSF are really low. Right? It's much easier, actually, to get money from operations, from management of agencies. A lot of times it's not competitive. It can be a long-term relationship. It takes way less time to go through the paperwork and everything and get the money. You just have to be flexible to actually work on what they need. And then go off and do your own pure science, but once you get, into that groove, you have a lot more opportunities to robustly fund the research that you want to do than if you just pursue the straight, academic route of the high prestige research money coming from NSF or NIH or something like that. So I think part of it is really how we mentor faculty coming up, junior faculty, to think more broadly about the options and how they can make an impact. And another is how we actually think about what kind of impact we make. When I was a postdoc, before I became professor at UC Merced, I was asked to do a briefing of a local legislator, state legislator. And I met with that legislator and their chief of staff. And, we had a really productive, wide-ranging conversation about things way outside of my official portfolio of expertise. And then I didn't think about it much for about 10 years or so. And I was here in Sacramento about a decade later as a professor, meeting with legislators and their staff, talking about climate change science and stuff. And I came back to my hotel, and this person was waiting for me in the lobby. And it turned out that chief of staff had gone on to replace, get elected and replace the legislator that I had briefed, and then gone on to be a leader of the state legislature, both houses eventually. And in their bag, they had a notebook with the notes that they had taken from that conversation a decade earlier. They'd been carrying it around for 10 years. And they were telling me about all the different types of legislation it had influenced over that decade, and the difference it had made. And this is like at the very beginning of my career, and I had no idea that I'd had that impact. A lot of the metrics that we focus on about what is the impact of our work and how we contribute to society are not very informative. And then these sort of chance interactions can have tremendous downstream effects, and you may never even know about it. I just was lucky enough to have them circle back to me and tell me, hey, you had an impact, and this is how it played out. And that was, you know, it didn't help me with my career advancement or anything like that, but it was very uplifting to know that you could make that kind of difference. So.
But let me build on that, the last part that you said. It didn't help you with your career advancement. And I think that's a critical problem. Because if we don't have this culture change within our faculty, where we provide the right recognition of the effort that goes into making a real impact, and we still measure things that are easy to measure, that you can get on Google Scholar, then we are not going to have that type of impact, or at least we are really breaking our legs in doing that, because why would I do it if I don't have anything back? I mean, there are people that are driven to do it, but others are not.
I'll just speak from my career perspective. That as someone who never expected it to count for anything, all the time that I spent talking to legislators and messing about in this town has been not only good for my career, but good for my students' careers and good for the university in 1,000 ways. And I've gotten rewarded for it, but not in the normal accounting sense that we usually have. I have also noticed that some professors will follow the incentives in a very false way. And there are some professors you would not want to incentivize to get engaged, to put it that way. You know who they are. You know they exist.
I'm not touching that with the 10.
I think we should move on to the next question.
Next question, next comment. There are two things in the chat. Are those question comments from? No?
He's checking.
So, no questions? Okay. Anything else we should, we have about 10 more minutes. Anything else we want to discuss in the panel? Any suggestion from someone outside of academia of what we should be doing better and how we can do all of the marvelous things that we are talking about in a way that helps the state of California, the communities, the world that we are trying to serve? Yes, was Jay?
I guess I haven't really retired. It might be useful to pick up a few problems, not disasters writ large, but some particular areas, and have more focused workshops here that have some of the state agencies and then the major researchers from the different campuses, and community extension programs all sit together to maybe map out how for wildfires or floods or whatever, the different state agencies, because they have the same collaboration problems we have across the universities, right? They're all people, so they all have the same problems. That might be a good way to focus those discussions, and then have, going out to a bar afterwards be part of that to sort of fluidize the interactions.
I actually agree with what you're saying. Is sometimes if you're not, like, even if we're all working on climate disasters, it's like such a big topic that, for instance, like, I know nothing about floods or even the language that you speak or how you do it or the methodology, and it would take a lot of work to like go through it, that it's almost too big to do that for everything, that focused a little bit more on like the things that you can at least wrap your head around in your topic is, yeah, yeah.
It's not how many people are there. In this metropolitan area, not only do you have the state agencies, quite a few of the federal agencies, but you also have a lot of local agencies that are big enough in a metropolitan area to have local expertise that have that voice come in as well. So I think this kind of facility here that we have, there's a lot of good advantage that we could take of this. The hardest part would be getting the time of the academics and the scheduling to get people to show up here.
Another thing I think it could be useful, especially in the discipline of flooding. I know that each disaster has its own complexity, but in flooding is to talk more about environmental change and not only about climate change. Climate change is one of the components of environmental change. And for flooding, it's not just much not only how much more water we are going to get into the system, but also how we have modified the system in a way that it's not able to handle that water. And this has to do with land use change, this has to do with urbanization, with aging infrastructure, the fact that we don't have yet enough technology that allows us to monitor the performance of all this infrastructure. None of these things have anything to do with climate change. This has to do with other things. So I think that broadened a little bit the topic from, so climate change is very important, but it's part of a much larger problem. I think that could help a lot also to find more effective solutions that target all these different elements within the.
So we grapple with this with the state climate assessment. I mentioned this morning, right, that we have fuels treatment scenarios, and they're partly stochastic, they're partly they have some randomness to them in the spatial footprinting of it. So every time we run a scenario, it's different, right? Even if it's all the same background starting point. And same thing for development footprint, and then we get climate. And when you start doing full factorial of these, right? So we have like, a global emission scenario where people are putting a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere through the end of century versus one where it's peaks mid-century and comes back down, and then you've got two different development scenarios, you got a couple of different fuel scenarios, and then the probability of a fire happening at any one point in space and time, even in a year with really severe conditions, is low, right? So you want to simulate it over and over again. So you end up with hundreds of millions of scenarios. And so you think about the old days where we said, hey, the system is stationary. That means that you might have short-term departures and extremes and things like that, but the process itself is staying the same, and you're going to come back to the same mean over time, right? Well, now we say, because of climate change, stationarity is dead. And so you can't look at the last 50 years in order to design, say, your water infrastructure, whatever. You have to use basic science to make projections into the future. But there's so many different futures you can project for, because there's so many different things that people could do over the next 10, 15, 20 years that would change how these impacts play out. So the complexity multiplies very quickly, right? And then we turn around and say, okay, well, every community in California has to have a climate action plan, no matter how big. It has to be science-based. And it has to be updated regularly, and if they're not doing it right, you can sue them and shut down any development or rezoning or anything like that. Well, it becomes this impossible problem, right? No, 50-something counties, and how many small towns in there that don't have those resources? I mean, we worked for a year with $1 million with San Mateo County that has tremendous capacity. It's a wealthy county, and it's very well staffed and everything like that. And there wasn't a whole lot to show for that $1 million, right? Imagine doing that every so many years across every county and trying to reach every community. There's so much more work that needs to be done on translating and engaging the existing science. I think we spend too much time and effort and money improving the spatial and temporal resolution and fine-tuning these models that are basically giving you the same results that we had a decade ago, right? And not enough on just the basic translation, on getting it out there in a format that's useful to people. That is where the bang for the buck is. That's where we need to be spending our time and money. That's my 2 cents.
And I see Bruce has his hand up, so.
I have 2 cents, 2 cents to have. I think the problem with we'll pick on the 5th climate assessment because we're starting on that, is that the reports, the science is seen as the end. And it shouldn't be. I mean, this is what LeRoy was just getting to. It should be the middle of the process, and we should use those reports, whether they're regional or statewide or topic specific. They should be the jumping off point for workshops and discussions to use them. But too often, as usual, the report becomes it.
Well, and I would make the argument that the reports are basically valueless, right? There's so many things that you try to cram into it. So every major topic is a paragraph or a sentence. There's not enough meat there to use. And at the same time, it's too long for most people to assimilate. So really, they don't serve much purpose. You know, I participated in a bunch of them. They're rarely cited. They're rarely used in any sort of effective way. They're not really a efficient or effective vehicle for helping people use these data.
Okay, I think it's the wrong way in which we are measuring impact. If we measure citations, great investment of your time. If we are measuring what is happening and changing on the field, then terrible waste of time. Jay, you want to have probably the last one for today?
One of the central problems I see in academics working on these real problems, any real problems, is that we academics love to cultivate uncertainty. Oh, I need to look at this factor and how it interacts with all these 10,000 other factors and under millions of scenarios. This is wonderful stuff, wonderful methodological stuff. But what the problem solvers need is they need for us to cultivate certainty as well. And we can honestly say, we can't give you any certain answers, but relative to them, the answers that we would give them are, in fact, pretty certain relative to the experience that they have to deal with. So we might think there's too much uncertainty in what we have to say, but for them, it's still very useful quasi-certainty.
And I always get shocked when I hear people tell me, you know, that the uncertainty is too much and that they can't do anything because we actually have more certainty now about the future than in all of human history. We know for a fact it's always going to be warmer than the past for the rest of the history of our civilization. Right? We know that by mid-century, every year in the Western United States will be hotter than the hottest year in history in the instrumental record up until 2000. And it's a completely different planet. And we know that beyond a shadow of the doubt. So that's way more guidance than we could give people about climate than at any time in human history before climate change started to dominate the process around us. So we actually have more certainty about the future now than ever before. And we need to focus on what we know and a lot less on what we don't know in this case, yeah.
I think it's actually an interesting needle to thread because, you know, we all, I'm sure, deal with a lot of young people and students and our children. And I see a lot of like, I don't know, they call it like climate doom or climate despair. And when you have certainties, it's a little terrifying to be like, but you can do something about it. It's all not doom and gloom. And I think it's a needle to thread to say, you know, this stuff is going to happen, but also a lot of the problems are because of infrastructure or because of things that we can work on or fund.
And I think,
yeah.
I mean, it's not exactly nothing because we can make it into something really big with things that are not necessarily natural, but we are at the end of the time, so I'm going to bring a closure to the to the session. I would like to thank again our panelists here and online, all our attendees, and all of the last few discussions are probably bringing up new questions and new topics of discussion for later. So I encourage everybody to continue talking with the panelists and have their feedback or ask questions or provide suggestions. We also like to hear. We probably as academics often don't do that enough, but we are learning to listen, and to listen not just to respond, but actually to learn what other people are doing and what they need. And so with this, I'd like to thank everybody and conclude this panel. Thank you.